Okay, so in part 2, we're going to be setting up the basic HTML for our web app so that things start actually displaying in the browser. So to get started, what we're going to do is you want to make sure that all of this HTML that we're editing or adding, is between the body tag. So between this opening and closing body tag. I'm going to go ahead and tab in so that it's easier to read. The first thing we want to do is we want there to be a name for our photo editing app at the top of the screen. So we'll use an H1 tag, and I'm just going to call this photo editor. Use your closing one. Save that change. Let's come over and refresh and see. We can see that the name now of our photo editor shows up inside the browser window, and it still shows up in the browser tab. After we add the name of our photo app, we're going to set up some containers, some div containers that will group certain content together on our website. So we have the image that we'll be editing, and we also have an array of different tools that we'll use. So the slider tools, the save and reset button, and the filter buttons. So we're going to use one div that contains the image and all the photo editing tools. And then we'll have a div inside of that div that has just the photo editing tools. So the first div, start with an opening div tag. We're going to give it a class of editor. So class equals quotes editor. Go ahead and add your closing div tag for this larger containing div and leave a space in between. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add that div inside of this one that will just contain our tools. So let's call this div, let's give it a class set to tools. And this div needs a closing div tag as well. After we've done this, we are going to be able to start adding some of those photo editing tools, like our save and reset buttons. So inside of your tool div, add a new button, give it an ID for the save button of save. For the reset button, you're going to set the ID to reset. Close that opening tag. We need the name save that will actually show up on the button, and the closing button tag. Save your change, refresh your page, and we can see that a save button appeared. Do the same thing, but this time let's make it for reset and make the ID reset. Once you're done, save your change, refresh your page, and we have 2 buttons. The next thing that we need to do is we actually need to add the input that's going to let us load an image from our computer into our app. So we're going to do this using an input tag. We're going to say type equals file so that it knows that we're picking a file from the computer. And then we're going to give this an ID of load. This is a self-closing tag. Save that change, reset. And now we can see that, or refresh, we can see that we have this choose file, and it lets us choose a file, and then it will update with the name of the file chosen once we load it in. Alright, so now we're moving on to the next step, which is we're going to add the sliders for our app. If you would like to add the filter buttons before the sliders, you can do that. I'm going to show you an example where I have my sliders arranged before the filter buttons. The only difference would be that you would place the HTML for your filter buttons above the HTML for your slider editors. But to get started for a slider, you want to make sure that you have open your project plan so that you can see the table that has the ID name, the type, the value for min and max, and the value that you want the slider to start at. The first thing we need to do is after the input, we're going to add an opening p tag. I'm going to press enter a couple times and have the closing p tag. I'm doing this so that my text defaults to style like normal paragraph text. Inside of these p tags, we're going to have a label tag. Now this label is going to be for our brightness slider. We're going to set the attribute to be 4 equals, and we're going to set it to be brightness, which is the same ID and name for our brightness input that we'll add in just a moment. In between the opening and closing label tag, we will write the word brightness, and then we'll close this label tag, save that change, And we're just going to see the word brightness show up. But we're going to add that slider next. So for a slider, we're going to use an input tag. So input ID we said is going to be brightness. We want to make the spelling the same. Name is brightness. Type. This is important. So to make it a slider, we set the type to range. The minimum value based on the table is going to be -100. The max is going to be 100. Max equals 100. And the value we want it to start at is going to be 0. Close that. Save that. And really quickly, I just want to show you what that part of the table looks like. So on the table, inside your project plan, you're going to go and find the photo effect or the slider effect, and you want the ID name to match, the type to be range, and this min, max, and value to match what you put in for each slider. Okay, so save the change, Control S, come back over, Control R to refresh, and we can see the slider that we have here. So now you're going to do the same 4 lines of code between these p tags for each slider that you have. So go ahead and do that, and we'll meet back here in a couple minutes. Go ahead, once you've added all of your sliders, save your change, refresh, and you should see these show up. Now, I want to point out something that's super important. The spelling and capitalization for the ID and name is super, super important for when we're writing our JavaScript. So you want to make sure that it matches what's in the table and that you don't have any errors. Otherwise, this is going to get you stuck later on. So double check your work. The next thing that we need to do after we've added our sliders is we need to add our filter buttons. So to do that, you're again going to use your project plan and use the table to help you figure out what is going to be the ID and the class for each of your filters. Spelling is going to count here as well, so make sure that you're careful. For each filter, we're going to be using a button tag, and we're going to be giving it an ID and a class. So I'll show you one, and then you'll be able to do the rest. So button ID equals vintage. Class. For each of the filter buttons, the class is going to be filter. Close that. I want the text on the button to display vintage. And then I need my closing button tag. Save that change, refresh, and we see my vintage button. So now you're going to do this for each of the 4 filters that you have. Alright, once you've added all of your buttons, make sure you save your change with Control S and then you refresh, and you should be able to see each of your filter buttons. One thing I want to point out here, again, capitalization is very important for a lot of these filters with 2 names. The second word is capitalized. The first letter of the second word is capitalized. So for the orange peel, we want orange to be all lowercase, the P and peel to be uppercase. So again, checking spelling is super important. All right, the last step before we add some comments to our code is going to be to add the placeholder for the image that we're going to load into the app. So we want this image to not be inside of the tool div. So this is going to be all of the tool div, but we do want it to be inside of the editor div. So after this first closing div tag, but inside the very last closing div tag, I'm going to add an image tag. So image, we're going to give it an ID equals to image, a class equal to img, and src, which is the source of the image, we're going to leave blank for now, but blank represented by 2 empty quotes, because that's going to be based on what we load in to the app. We're going to hit Control S, come over here, Control R to refresh. Nothing should change after that. And that is going to be part 2. Now you want to make sure that you go back and add at least 3 comments in HTML for things that you coded. You want to include a comment for the sliders, the filter button, and one other part of your HTML of your choosing. So So remember, you should put a comment above the code that you're commenting. An HTML comment is going to be a bracket, exclamation point, dash, dash, and then you can write your comment. Closing dashes, closing bracket, and the coloring of your app code should come back to normal. So you need 3 of those. All right, see you back here for part 3.